Hi there, I'm Tom Burgess and welcome to the Real Agenda Network. And this is the first in our new series of the Real Agenda America, where we focus on issues specific to the United States. Now, having said that, today's topic does not just affect America, but the world and everyone who lives here. Today, we will look at climate change from an American perspective, especially now that the USA has rejoined the Paris Agreement. Now, here on the Real Agenda, we want to know how things can be fixed and what we can do to make change happen. We're releasing this podcast on the day after Earth Day, which was the 22nd of April 2021. But as has been said, Earth Day is really every day. Now, in an early episode on the Real Agenda, we interviewed Dr. Gail Bradbrook, the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Will Hackman, who has spent the last 10 years running political campaigns and advancing public policy related to environmental conservation. And he is now working on a new book project about the need to reframe the climate conversation in the US to a more personal level. Now, we're really pleased to find out that 47% of our listeners to the Real Agenda Network are in North America. So now we have a new show especially for you. But do I sound American? Well, no. I'm originally from London, England, but I spent 7 great years in San Francisco Bay Area of California, where originally I was advising technology companies on global communication. Then I wrote my book, From Here to Prosperity, A New Political Agenda, and also worked on the Bernie 2016 campaign, which was indeed great fun. Plus, I was on the national organising team for a new People's Party. So it was back in March when I spoke to Will Hackman, as I was keen to get an update, especially about the plans of the new Biden administration and its focus for the future. So I started by asking Will, and we all know climate change is a human survival issue, but what do you see as the biggest problem facing effective action to minimise climate change?
So the biggest problem I see is the misunderstanding of what climate change means to people individually. I think we've had decades of great advocacy and research and scientific cutting edge awareness of the climate problem to all of us and to nature and natural systems. But so many people still don't see the direct links to climate change in their lives. And I think that is the thing. I work in advocacy. I build campaigns for environmental issues in many different places in the world. And you build support for those things by telling a personal story that people can connect with. They can identify with the story that they're hearing, and that's why they get involved in a particular issue to save a forest or save a coastline, or they start caring about the oceans, or, it's that personal connection to them. And we need to do the same thing with climate change. We have to have people understand that this isn't something that's 30 years or 50 years down the line. It's happening right now in their communities, within their lifetimes, and try to figure out how they can tell the stories of what climate change means to them and the changes that they've already seen. I think just asking somebody the question, what does climate change mean to you, instantly makes people start thinking about it, even if they were skeptical a moment beforehand, like, well, I don't understand, I don't know if this is really something I can agree with, or I've heard something about the Green New Deal and I don't agree with that type of policy. Just what does climate change mean to you? And people start thinking about it, and they start thinking over the course of their life. I mean, this is what I do in issue advocacy. It's storytelling. At the end of the day, if you've got a global issue that you're trying to connect people to and trying to build more public support, the power of storytelling is greater than anything else you can do.
You talk about reframing the issue and the need to reframe. What do you mean by that?
One of the things that I like to say is that the earth doesn't care about you. And it's kind of it's kind of a shocking thing to put out there in the environmental community. But what that means, what I'm responding to, is this idea that environmental activists are trying to save the world, or that anyone, climate scientists, politicians, that any one of us is trying to save the world. And look, I spend every day trying to reduce natural destruction to habitats, both marine habitats and terrestrial habitats. I care about that deeply. But we are not trying to save the world with climate change. We are trying to save our place within the world before it's too late. I go as far to say that we are not in a climate crisis. We are in a human crisis. And our call to action is about saving our place within nature. I think if people thought about climate change from that perspective, they would connect with it more. I mean, again, my goal isn't to get people who already care about climate change to give them something else that they can use here. We have 35 in the United States. We have at least 35% of the population, if not more, who either doesn't believe climate change is real or does not feel that they are personally connected to climate change in some way. And so that means that that's not a top issue for them. And 35% of the population is a lot of people, and it's enough people to ensure that we're not able to move forward at the scale required to really solve this challenge. This isn't a challenge. This is one of the biggest challenges humanity has ever faced, and we're not going to be able to solve this challenge if 35% of the population doesn't think it's important. So how do you get more people on your side? How do you build those bridges? You get people to understand that this is about us. This is about the sustainability of human civilization into the future. And we are trying to save nature to a certain extent because we're trying to ensure that the natural ecosystems that support human life, that support, our food supply, that support our oxygen supply, we need to ensure those things continue so that we will continue to be here. I mean, a million years from now, the world is going to be just fine. This isn't about saving the world.
So the United States has rejoined the Paris Agreement. How significant is that? And will it actually be followed through with action?
I think it is incredibly significant. I mean, the United States was one of the key factors that got the Paris Agreement done in the first place. And even though the last 4 years has seen a rollback in ambition from the United States, the Paris Agreement is still in force with every other country in the world. And now it is, again, with the United States. And so what President Biden did the first day that he came into office was to say that we were rejoining the Paris Agreement and to issue an executive order that would roll back some of the things that President Trump had done over the last 4 years, including canceling the Keystone XL pipeline. But then a week later, he issued another extremely broad and sweeping executive order on January 27th, the executive order on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. And this executive order is the most aggressive set of actions that the United States has ever taken on climate change. It goes way beyond what the Obama administration ever did. And it is an executive order, and we can talk about, the power that executive orders have versus congressional legislation and federal agency regulations and that kind of thing. Everyone is still trying to figure out what all of these executive orders are going to turn into that Biden outlined in these series of orders that he put out there. But one, that I can just point out right now is he called for a carbon pollution free electricity sector no later than 2035, which is just incredible. And, let's put aside the debate on whether or not that's possible for a moment. I think it is possible. And I think even if we don't get to 100% carbon pollution free electricity sector by 2035, we can get very close to it, we can make incredible gains in clean energy deployment over the next few years. We can move that. We can inject lots of investment to incentivize deployment of wind and solar and other clean energy technologies. But that alone, this goal, and this is one goal of many goals in this executive order, will reshape American energy and American electricity. So what the United States is trying to do now is be an image to the world. We are trying to show leadership on climate that regardless of what happened over the last 4 years, we are repositioning ourselves as a global leader on climate, both within our own domestic borders and what we're planning to do internationally. I mean, Special Envoy John Kerry, it has a whole additional list of things that he's going to be doing internationally with lots of other countries to create new agreements and knowledge sharing opportunities and international finance commitments for adaptation and mitigation in the developing world. And, so what we're planning to do internationally is going to be incredibly important as well.
Are you optimistic that there will be follow through on this and it will actually turn into real action rather than just talking?
I do. And I'll tell you what to look at, in the next couple of weeks. So on Earth Day, April 22nd, in connection with the Global Climate Leaders Summit, which the United States is hosting, we are, by our own actions and by the actions of the Biden administration, we are putting a big spotlight on Earth Day this year to kind of be the culmination of our vision for U.S. action on climate change over at least the next 10 to 15 years. What we're going to do on Earth Day is release our nationally determined contribution, which is the U.S. plan under the Paris Agreement. It has to be updated every 5 years. We had one plan already that was submitted when we first signed the Paris Agreement 5 years ago that took us to 2025. It called for a 26 to 28% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions over 2005 levels, I believe, by the year 2025. But this plan is going to make a lot of news, going to have a lot of coverage, and it'll be out at some point over the next month, and we're all going to be able to take a look at it, and then we can evaluate whether or not we think this is an aggressive enough plan for the United States to follow. I think it will be. I think it's going to be the most aggressive climate plan that we have ever seen. It'll be a continuation of the executive orders. It's going to outline federal agency action at the EPA, Department of Interior, others that will be in line with climate policy. What we're seeing out of the Biden administration is just incredible in terms of essentially all actions that they are taking through a lens on climate change, economic actions, national security actions, energy actions, transportation, infrastructure, housing, fairness, environmental justice. It's all coming through this lens of climate. And that lens is all coming through our commitments to the Paris Agreement. So we are back in the Paris Agreement, and you better believe all of the decisions that we are making are keeping the Paris Agreement goals in mind.
You also commented on before about a business case for combating climate change. What is that?
I was at the United Nations Climate Conference a few days after Donald Trump was elected president. I was in Morocco at the time. We were all in a little bit of a shock. But I remember going into a press conference and hearing John Kerry in person talking about the importance of the private sector. And he speaks with authority on climate change and with authority from what the public sector can do. He spent his entire career in the public sector. But he was talking about the private sector and the importance of the private sector. And what he said really stuck with me at the time. He said, solving the climate crisis is too great for the public sector alone. The private sector will be the most important player. The signal that Secretary Kerry was sending to folks like Trump and others in the private sector who might have still been skeptical of climate change at the time. I mean, essentially what he was talking about was investment. If you look at the amount of investment that's needed to fulfill the goals of the Paris Agreement, clean energy investment in wind and solar, battery technology investment, research and development. I mean, it costs billions of dollars just in research and development, infrastructure updates, power grid 2.0. It's too much for the federal government to support all on its own. So
I mean, there is a huge, opportunity for business, however you describe it, the Green New Deal or the infrastructure spending, because and history has told us that. There was an example that when people didn't want slavery abolished because there'd be no one to do the work, but when it was abolished, it was actually, or rather than be a slump, but in fact it was quite the opposite, because it encouraged more other forms of energy and other ways of doing things, and it created more activity and more economic growth. And that's really the same as the opportunity that presents us as we switch to renewable energy. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about the clean energy revolution, that is something that is coming from the private sector. We want millions of Americans employed in green technologies and clean energy. We want them to be making good money, providing for their families, working in the clean energy sector and other sectors that are contributing to a zero carbon economy in the United States. This is the future of what this looks like. This is going to employ tens of millions of Americans in new industries that can put the United States, back in a leading role of manufacturing and technology and deployment of these new technologies, from the power sector to the transportation sector to the agricultural sector to the residential sector. I mean, there is so much work, physical work that needs to be done to transform our country into a country of zero carbon. Every house, every building, every road, every car, every plane and truck and train and ship needs to be transformed into something that has either a zero carbon or net zero, carbon impact. And that's going to take a lot of people and a lot of investment. And the public sector can work with the private sector. What I always talk about is how the public sector provides a framework and security to the private sector. So, the Paris Agreement was public policy. It was an international climate agreement that every country signed on to and then went forward and implemented their own domestic plans for how they were going to implement the Paris Agreement. And that turned into public policy in all of these countries. And what that does is that provides this framework that business can plug into and say, okay, this is the goal. We are clear that we are not going to rise global average temperature beyond 2 degrees Celsius by the year 2100. So what do we need? What does that look like? What does the private sector need to do? What does the transportation sector need to do? What is GM as an auto manufacturer? How can we plug into that?
I'm really pleased that you're optimistic there, Will, and that's good to know. But before we go, we'd like to talk about, what can we, the people, do about this, and how can we make things happen? So I just wondered if you could just give us sort of 3 action points that anybody listening to this show could actually go out and do to make change happen.
So I do have 3 main action points that I would suggest everyone do. I think it would make a huge difference. So the first one we've already talked about. Ask yourself and ask other people around you, what does climate change personally mean to you? It sounds simple, and it is simple, but that reframing of how we all think about climate change and how we think about our personal connection. Again, this isn't something that is happening just in the Arctic or in glaciers far away. This is happening in our community now. This isn't 20 years or 50 years down the line. This is today. We're already seeing these things. What does it mean to you and your family? And I think that'll make a huge difference in starting to reframe this conversation. And I'm actually writing a book right now on this very topic, and I'll have many more things that people can do in that book. And I'm looking forward to talking about that more. It'll be a little bit clearer what folks can do along these lines. But reframing the conversation is so important to any global issue like this. Number two, I come from American politics. I ran campaigns for years, moved all over the country, working in our muddy political democratic process, but it was absolutely incredible. And, the guidance I give to everybody is to engage in the democratic process to the greatest extent that you can. If that just means voting, that's great. Make sure you vote, but there are other things you can do as well. You can help register people to vote. You can go knock on doors. You can help spread awareness and education. Engaging in our democratic process. Again, if we don't have the right leaders in power, just look at the progress we were able to make on climate change in the first week of this new administration versus the last 4 years of the previous administration. Elections matter. They matter at the federal level. They matter at the local level. We have to elect people who understand science and who understand that climate change is a threat that we all face. But there are many ways to engage in the democratic process. I think it's all of our civic duty to do so. And then number three, take the sustainability steps that you can and that you feel make sense to you. If you can drive an electric vehicle or a vehicle that just has higher fuel efficiency standards than your last vehicle, please go ahead and do that. That makes a big difference. If you can ride your bicycle to work, when the pandemic ends and we're able to, go to our offices again, reduce your footprint as much as you can. Install a smart thermostat at home. There are many, many things that you can do to take those sustainability steps so that you are living a life in line with climate awareness. But I put all of those things into one category, and it's going to be different for each person. Because really, the first, reframing the climate conversation to the personal, engaging in your democratic process, and then taking these sustainability steps. I think those are the most important things people can do.
I can suggest one other thing, which is pretty easy to take, is signing up for renewable energy. I say that because we've just done it. And, it was so easy and so straightforward. And then you think, well, at least all the energy I'm using is renewable.
Absolutely. And in many big cities, they offer that as an easy choice. I do that in Washington, D.C., where I live.
Anyway, Will, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate coming on today. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much indeed, Will. That is absolutely great, and that's a really good insight. Thank you. As Will says, doing something about climate change isn't about saving the Earth. The Earth doesn't concern itself with being saved. It's about saving us and our place within nature before it's too late. So to motivate us into action, we have to allow for things to be hopeful, inspire positive action, and show everyone how we will all benefit. As Will suggests, this means reframing the climate conversation to the personal in order to inspire universal public buy-in for the rapid action we so desperately need. Now, what do you think? Do contact us on info@realagendaradio.org or via our website, realagenda.org. We would love to hear your views. And if you're polite, you could receive a signed copy of my book, From Here to Prosperity. So what's up next on the Real Agenda Network? Well, there's plenty to choose from. We offer a range of related shows on this channel. We recently added podcasts from Extinction Rebellion, Compassion in Politics, the Equality Trust, and Tax Justice Network. The Real Agenda aims to inform, inspire and involve those who want a democratic, inclusive and fairer society that respects human rights and protects the planet. Now, if you think you or your organisation should be featured on the Real Agenda America, or if you are a podcast producer who would like to add your show to our network to boost your audience, then let us know. Special thanks to our sponsors, Reverse Media Group, one of the fastest growing search and media companies. Find out why at reversemediagroup.com. One thing is certain, people want to see change to a more compassionate and just society, as well as a more courageous politicians prepared to do the right thing for people over party. It's not happening, but it can. It's urgent and it's up to us to make it happen. Because that's the real agenda, America. I'm Tom Burgess. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.